Hey guys, Putzleman945 here. Welcome back to another video. In today's video, I am making a list that I promised I would make in um the big updated lists that I made last week, and this is a list I have not made before. Um, but I think it's a really interesting list. This is my top 10 dynamics in fiction. Now, you explain a little what I mean about dynamics. Because that word can be interpreted in a lot of different ways. What I'm referring to here is specifically the relationship slash rivalry between two characters. AKA two different characters' dynamics with each other and how they interact. That's what I'm referring to when I'm talking about this list. So every one of these entries is a pair of characters, and this is a list of my favorite of how those dynamics interact. So hopefully that makes sense for the purpose of this list. With that explanation hopefully being adequate, at number 10, I have Alucard and Anderson from Hellsing Ultimate. This one is just awesome because these two are such utter badasses, and every single moment, even when they almost are about to fight, is just mega aura farming points. And but that's not the only reason that that this dynamic is on this list. Because I also really love the kind of deeper philosophical ideal clash between the two of them, and like the different things that they represent, and how it feels very satisfying to see that kind of clash resolved when their fight ends up happening. Um, and number 9 is Kogami and Makishima from Psycho-Pass. These two just have an absolutely epic rivalry because Kogami is like the detective trying to hunt him down. Not really a detective. He's like one of the enforcer dudes or whatever. Um, that work for the detectives. And Makishima is just being one of the best anime villains, being this devious fucker who is just absolutely manipulating the strings, and the cat and mouse dynamic between the two of them is so ridiculous. And it's so fun and just captivating to watch. And number 8, uh, probably the most iconic dynamic in all of cinema, we have Luke and Vader. Um, this is really one of those ones where I don't really know what I could say that hasn't already been said about this, because this dynamic is just it's what makes Star Wars, basically. Um I really don't know what else more I could say on it than that. It's friggin' Luke and Vader. And number 7 is Emiya and Archer from Fate Unlimited Blade Works. What makes this dynamic so good is number 1, the reveal that they are both like of the same family name, and they are essentially the same character in different forms. And like the extremely subtle hints that lead up to that reveal, um and the kind of just full realization of the like opposites and like the way that that leads into Archer's backstory and how like there was just so much amazing build up. This is just this is a fantastic dynamic. Um, and it was probably my favorite thing about Unlimited Blade Works as a show. And number six is Kenji and Friend from 20th Century Boys. I kind of touched on this a little bit when I was making the protagonists list, but I love how for this one I love how it's so interesting compared to Tenma and Johan. It's like an opposite. That of which is higher on this list, by the way. Um Henry and Friend is really interesting because it's a fascinating reversal of Tenma and Johan, where like Kenji has way more of an effect on Friend versus the effect that uh Friend has on Kenji. Obviously they have an effect on each other, but the way that Kenji and his image and memory seems to affect the friend's actions and his behavior, especially after in the climax of the story where the second friend comes after Fukube dies. That kind of dynamic especially is fascinating when observing his actions, but also like kind of delving into Fukube and in his past when once that is like has been like properly revealed and stuff. Seeing that dynamic um was just mega interesting to me. Um and yeah. And number five is Thorfinn and Askeladd. This one is a incredible dynamic because the way that um Thorfinn's relationship with Askeladd evolves from being a person that he wants to kill to essentially becoming like a second father figure to him and being okay with obeying his orders as long as he ends up getting revenge later, only to end up not being able to do that. And it just completely destroys and changes his character, like from the ground up. Is just an incredible relationship. And Askeladd as a villain is just fantastic because um he is um he is this like constant looming presence even after his death. And the way that that like tends to affect Thorfinn's actions, especially that scene in season two where it's like Thorfinn's has a nightmare and Askeladd talks to him in his dreams. That's such a peak scene. And just seeing the way that um Askeladd had such a profound effect on Thorfinn, even well after he died, was extremely fucking cool. Um, and number four is Cloud and Sephiroth. Um, I've talked about multiple aspects of this, both when I talked about Cloud in the protagonist tier list and Sephiroth in the villains tier list. But this is one of the best dynamics because of the like looming presence that Sephiroth has throughout the entire game in a very similar way to Askeladd and Makishima. He has this like looming presence throughout the entirety of the game. And like the way that he like manipulates Cloud's mind and actions is just insane because it doesn't seem like it would work on Cloud, and yet there's these moments where he does things that are so out of character that could only be a manipulation by Sephiroth. And like seeing the way that Cloud acts whenever he sees Sephiroth, or he thinks he sees Sephiroth, or something to do with Sephiroth, is just and like the way that he tries to hide it from his friends as well. Um, okay, sorry about that. I had to get some water. Um, I don't remember if I had finished talking about Khan Sephiroth. I hope I didn't cut that at the end of an incomplete point. I'm sorry if I did. I'm moving on because I can't remember what I was talking about. And number three is Akira and Ryuo from Devilman Crybaby. This is by far the best aspect of this show, and the intensely deep themes that surround Akira and Ryuo as characters is just fascinating. So, first off, I love their friendship and the way that starts out. Um, and then just kind of the slow way that like Ryuo tends to like twist the role between them. So like they start out as like perfect equals, and then just like the more you watch, it just gradually ends up like this, where Ryuo is the god and Akira is like the bottom, the absolute bottom, like the devil. Um, and even though Akira is not that, he's very much the good guy. The world does not see him that way, and that's what Riro manipulates the world to be. He manipulates the world against Akira. Um, and the way that he kind of seems to turn into a god is just some of the craziest shit I've ever seen in an anime, and it just makes the two of them as a duo and their entire dynamic just like one of the most interesting duos in all fiction, which is why they're so high on this list. If you have not watched Devil May Cry, Crybaby, watch it. Okay, number two, the aforementioned Tenma and Johan. Now, like I said, how Kenji and Friend is the opposite effect. This is like the standard one that's also been a pattern of several others on this list, where Johan affects Tenma a lot more than Tenma affects Johan. Um, and this dynamic is a big part of the reason why Tenma is such an interesting protagonist to follow because they're like the way that Johan's constant subtle manipulations and appearances seem to affect the story and continue changing the mystery that Tenma has to solve is just it is such brilliant character writing, and it's like the best kind of cat and mouse game that you can get in an anime ever, in my opinion. Um, all right, and number one, and this is like in my mind the undisputed number one. Like I don't think this will ever change ever. My number one for dynamics in fiction is Guts and Griffith, and I've kind of talked about aspects of this when I covered both of these characters in the protagonists and villains tier list, not tier list, top 10 lists last week. Um, but these two start out as the best of friends. And the way that in a very similar way to Ryuo is just kind of like throwing on its head completely is so fascinating. And from Guts' perspective, like what I think is so interesting about this dynamic is the fact that Guts is the one that constantly looks up to Griffith. And a big part of his character arc is learning that to have the confidence in himself that he can be on equal terms with Griffith, and the fact that he can believe in himself enough to beat Griffith. And then from the opposite perspective, there is Griffith, who doesn't really look down on Guts, far from it. But like he kind of sees him as like a good template to attempt to shape his own image into. And what's so interesting in watching the development of Griffith's character is seeing his reaction to how this doesn't exactly go as planned, but then him still being satisfied with the result of them being equals and of equal status, and Guts being the only one who could equal Griffith's status. And then the way that even that facade for Griffith just slowly seems to start collapsing, where he suddenly becomes worried that Guts will surpass him, and then he gets caught up in his own inferiority, and then he begins to think of himself as lesser than Guts and losing that equal status. And you can this is like one of my favorite aspects of this is like my favorite aspect of Berserk's visual storytelling is like where Griffith is like the section of the story in the latter half of the Golden Age arc where Griffith has like almost zero dialogue, and yet you can tell so much about his feelings through like only seeing him in a helmet and almost naked. Um, and just like the image that that creates versus the one that was implanted in the reader's mind at the beginning of the arc is just masterful. And then the way that like desperation turns to frustration, turns to anger, turns to satisfaction, and like evil and like evil glory when he becomes a member of the God Hand, and then just in turn the way that Guts's character reacts to that by like being this by just like almost having a complete mental collapse at seeing the events of the eclipse and Griffith's actions and what he ends up doing to Casca to make her lose her memories. Um, and just the way that the dynamic so fundamentally affects both characters in such a profound way. I don't think there will ever be another piece of fiction that outdoes the sheer brilliance of the dynamics between Guts and Griffith. But yeah, that's gonna do it for this video. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you later. Bye bye.